And so here we are, moving on past the 3 starter Pokemon and getting into the real meat of the Kanto Pokemon. No more talking about how scarce they are because of the SPC, or how you have to pay a breeder out the butt just to get one. Now we get into the more common boys and girls. To kick us off, let's talk about bugs. Specifically, Caterpie and its following evolutions. So, Caterpie is a small, foot-long, green bug Pokemon with suction cup-like feet along the bottom of its body, and a large red horn-like protrusion on its forehead. I'm sure almost everyone has seen them outside at some point or another. They're very, very common, especially in warmer months. Caterpie then evolves into its next stage of Metapod, which is its chrysalis form. Metapod looks like a green crescent moon that has 2 eyes near the top. Shortly after becoming a Metapod, the Pokemon will evolve again and become a Butterfree, a 3-foot-tall butterfly with white and black wings and a purple center body. They are most common in the Kanto region, of course, but they can also be found all over the world. Despite being small prey Pokemon, they have become very successful everywhere they are introduced. But just because it's common doesn't mean that it's the right Pokemon for everyone. So let's go through how to care for them and see if these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. For the first 3 care guides that I've done, the 3 Kanto starters, go back and listen to them if you're interested in how to raise those. The enclosures for 2 out of 3 of them have been fairly large and involved, changing at least part of the environment. For Caterpie and its subsequent evolutions, it's almost the exact opposite. You see, for Caterpie to live healthy and happy, it really only requires one thing: a tree. Any old tree. Look outside. Do you see a tree? If so, then you already have the perfect habitat for a wild Caterpie to live in. Now, I'm going to suggest a different kind of enclosure that will keep your Caterpie from wandering off and, more importantly, from being taken as prey by one of the many predators that Caterpie have. That's not to say that you couldn't just put your Caterpie in a tree and leave it there. You absolutely could. My parents do, and they raise enough Caterpie to cover a couple dozen trees. But that does hold a lot of risks for your Pokemon. So I'm going to tell you how to set up an enclosure that will keep your Pokemon happy without putting it at risk. So when making an enclosure for your Caterpie, the big things to keep in mind are warmth, vertical space, and climbing decor. Let's tackle vertical space first. Caterpie love to climb. It's almost the only thing they ever do besides eat. So when making your Pokemon's enclosure, you'll want to make the frame in the dimensions of 3 feet by 3 feet on the bottom and then 5 feet tall. The frame can be made out of any material. Caterpie can climb anything with their suction cup feet, but the easiest to get a hold of and build with would probably be wood. Now, the walls of the enclosure bring me to the next topic: warmth. Caterpie, its evolutions, and most other bug Pokemon live in warmer climates. Now, if you live somewhere like Alola, where it's warm all the time, then you can set up your Caterpie's enclosure outside, and even use a netting for the walls to allow good airflow through the enclosure. That's not needed for the Pokemon's health, but if you are going to have netting, then you're going to want the airflow for you, because that red horn that Caterpie has reeks to Arceus. The smell acts as a defense mechanism to ward off potential predators, and it is very potent. By allowing good airflow through the enclosure, the stink will get blown out and away from your Caterpie. But if you don't live somewhere that is warm all year round, then I would suggest keeping the enclosure inside and using glass walls instead. It will take up almost the same space as a fridge, and can be placed really anywhere. Just make sure that you either have a door installed, or make it so that one of the glass panes is removable, so you can get in to clean and such. As for the inside of the enclosure, just put a few branches that the Pokemon can use to climb. You can use fake branches, but just make sure that there aren't any fake leaves on those branches. Caterpie are voracious eaters, and if something even so much as looks like a leaf, they will eat it. But we will get into food later. Oddly enough, Caterpie is an example of the Pokemon that gets easier to care for when it evolves. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it is an amazingly pleasant event. As for how to care for a Metapod, you pretty much don't do anything for it. When it evolves, your Pokemon will either have attached itself to the branches in its enclosure using string, or it will have settled itself on the floor of its enclosure. Either way, just grab it from wherever it's sitting and place it somewhere warm while you wait for it to evolve again into your Butterfree. Use it as a paperweight on your desk, a cuddle buddy during the night, or heck, just leave it on your counter near your sink, just somewhere you can keep an eye on it. Butterfree is also a low maintenance Pokemon, but for different reasons than Metapod. You see, as a Butterfree, the risk to them from flying Pokemon goes way down. Butterfree have a natural defense mechanism, just like Caterpie with its smelly horn. But theirs is much, much more effective. When a Butterfree flaps its wings, it scatters poisonous scales in the air around it. These scales, while not deadly, cause irritation, blindness, and even partial short-term paralysis. These scales are highly effective against all but fully evolved flying types, and those kinds of predators aren't that common in the wild. Fire types could do damage too, but they are even rarer in the environments that Caterpie stays in. The problem is that the scales are also effective against people. So once your Metapod evolves into a Butterfree, you'll have to move it outside as a necessity to avoid poisoning yourself, which is, bad. So moving it outside is really the only option. Luckily, like I said, only fully evolved flying Pokemon can really do any kind of damage to Butterfree now. So the risk of living outside is minimal at best. To further reduce that risk, you can build a small enclosure for your Butterfree. Really, it's going to be more of just a room, a place for your Pokemon to sleep at night and get away from bad storms. The best way to do it is to make a wooden box, about 4 feet cubed to allow for the size of the Pokemon's wings, and attach it to the side of a tree, just under the lowest branches. Then, on the side facing away from the tree, instead of a wooden wall, you want to make it a heavy-duty rubber flap, like what they use for Pokemon doors. That way, it will allow the Butterfree to come and go as it pleases, but won't let things like rain inside. After that, just keep an eye on the box and make any repairs that are needed. So, the specs for the enclosure I gave you before are only rated for 1, possibly 2 Caterpie, and only for 1 Butterfree. So, if you plan on housing other Pokemon with them, you'll have to either build a separate enclosure for those Pokemon, or adjust how you plan on housing your Caterpie evolution based on the Pokemon you'll be housing them with. Of course, other Caterpie evolutions are a yes. They are found in the wild in large nests all living together. Just remember, you'll need the space for them all. And having a full nest can strip trees clean of leaves in weeks. Trust me, Mom and Dad have to rotate the Caterpie around from tree to tree each month, just so they don't kill the trees by eating all the leaves. You'll want to avoid fire types and flying types at all costs. Like I said before, they are common predators of the species, and putting them together can be very, detrimental to your Pokemon's health. Just remember, I recommend keeping your Caterpie inside to avoid the dangers of flying types. Don't go sticking them together. Let's see. Anything carnivorous would be bad unless you have a Butterfree to keep the younger evolutions safe. Caterpie and sometimes Metapod can make easy prey for carnivorous Pokemon. Grass types would be a good fit to house them with, ones like Badoo, Shroomish, things like that. Fairy types might also be a good fit. They tend to be caring Pokemon that'll take a shine to small Pokemon like Caterpie. Just things that aren't aggressive and will leave smaller Pokemon alone are best. Availability. So, we're going to do a small experiment. I want you to take out your phone, go over to your GPS, and find where the nearest forest is. Then, grab an empty Pokeball and just walk around that forest for like an hour or two. You'll probably find a Caterpie. That's how easy it is to find a Caterpie. Now, of course I'm exaggerating, but not by much. They are almost everywhere. Eterna Forest, Lush Jungle, Viridian Forest, all of them. Out of all the different regions, the only two who don't have native Caterpie populations are Hoenn and Unova. And even if you live in those regions, you can 100% find a breeder near you who is breeding and selling Caterpie. My parents did. Still do, as a matter of fact. They produce dozens and dozens of Caterpie per breeding season, and they are only one of hundreds of breeders of Caterpie out there. I personally don't breed them, partly because I have slight childhood trauma from being cocooned in string when I was really young while cleaning out the Caterpie nests, and partly because they are such a common Pokemon. If you want a Caterpie, you'll be able to find one, easily. Care. Following in the pattern of setting up their enclosure and getting a hold of one, the care for Caterpie and its evolutions is very easy to handle. Starting off, their enclosure won't need much upkeep at all, aside from some regular cleaning. Sticky string will begin to accumulate inside their enclosure, hanging off the branches and the sides. Now, this won't bother your Pokemon so much, as in the wild they tend to live in nests made of the stuff. But the bigger problem is that other stuff, like the Pokemon's waste, can get caught in the string, and if left there, it can become a health risk. As Caterpie grow and get bigger and closer to evolving, they will also shed their old exoskeleton, growing a new one as they do so. These old shell bits will also get caught in the string. So every few days, take the Pokemon out of the enclosure and use a Pokemon-safe dish soap to help dissolve and clean up the excess string. Then let it dry, and once it's all dry, you can replace your Caterpie and he will be all good. I'm not even going to mention Metapod here. It doesn't move, it doesn't eat, it doesn't even make noise. The most cleaning you'll have to do to it is making sure that dust doesn't accumulate on it wherever you put it. But Butterfree's enclosure will need to be cleaned out just like a Caterpie. They don't leave string everywhere, and since they should be living outside now, aside from their box, all of their waste should be outside as well. No, what you'll need to clean out are all the wing scales that build up in the tree hole. Like I said, as Butterfree flaps its wings, it spreads poisonous wing scales around in the air. Normally, the wind is enough to take care of this and it scatters them all around, but inside the box, that won't happen. So all the scales that come off your Butterfree's wings while it's sleeping or eating will just build up in piles on the floor and in the corner. The best way to deal with this is to put on a pair of goggles and a mask so the scales won't get into your body, and vacuum them out about once a week. Please be careful while doing this. The scales may not be deadly, but if you inhale too many of them, it may lead to a trip to the doctor. And trust me, nobody wants to be the guy that had to go to the doctor from Butterfree poisoning. Moving on to food, it's probably the easiest diet that I've gone over so far in these care guides, which isn't saying much since this is only the fourth one, but still. For Caterpie, you'll need a water dish, one of the ones that hang from the walls. You can get one of the ones that sits on the bottom of the enclosure, but that will quickly get full of cast-off string and falling detritus from food. The ones that hang in the wall of the enclosure, while not free from the possibility of string getting in them, means you'll really only need to clean it every now and then when you need to replace the water. Speaking of food though, I promised it would be easy, and it is. Leaves. Just regular old leaves. You have to remember that they live in trees in the wild, and all they eat is leaves. So the best way to feed a Caterpie is, in the morning, you go outside, grab a big handful of leaves, and drop them into your Pokemon's home. It'll start nibbling away at them instantly. Repeat that every morning, and if you happen to pass by and see that they have eaten all the leaves you gave them, just go grab another handful and drop them in. Remember, a Caterpie's only goal is to eat enough to evolve, and giving them all the food they can eat will only move them along in that goal. Again, we're just going to ignore Metapod. It doesn't eat anything. I'd call it a rock, but there are plenty of rock Pokemon that are actually more work to take care of. As for Butterfree, you have two options. The first is the natural route, letting Butterfree collect its own food from the environment. To do this, you'll need to plant plenty of flowers around the spot where you have your Butterfree's box hung. Then, the Butterfree will naturally go to them to collect the pollen to make honey to eat. The second option is to leave a small dish of honey out for it. Not in the box, it will quickly get covered in wing scales if you put it in there, but just on your windowsill or your front porch. Your Butterfree will come over, eat its fill, and fly off. One last bit about caring for these Pokemon. During this whole care guide, I've been talking about what to do if you live in a warmer climate, or if it's the warm season where you live, and how to take care of them during that. But what about winter? Well, bug Pokemon like Butterfree and Caterpie have plenty of tricks to deal with the winter. So let's say that you keep your Caterpie outside, or that you have such a large colony of Caterpie evolutions that they won't fit in your house. Well, don't worry about their health when things turn cold. At some point in the fall, usually after the leaves change color but before the majority of them begin to fall to the ground, the cold temperatures will cause the Caterpie and the Butterfree to enter a sort of dormant state, hibernating through the winter in a warm, cozy spot. Usually, this means inside their big nest of string, and if you have your Caterpie outside, it will do just that. It'll make a big string ball at or near the top of its enclosure and encase itself in it, trapping in heat and keeping it safe for the winter. Butterfree, since it's already living outside if you've been following my advice, will simply enter its box and hibernate in there for the winter. This is one of the reasons that I mentioned getting a heavy rubber flap for the door. Most of the heavy-duty ones will trap in heat and keep out the cold while your Butterfree hibernates through the winter. Metapod, well, its shell is designed to keep it safe for the winter. Short of burying it in a snowbank, the winter won't do much to affect it. But no matter what evolution you have during the winter, just remember to check on them every few days to make sure that the string ball is intact for Caterpie or that your Butterfree is still healthy. Cost. Now, after the first 3 care guides for the starters, I'm sure you are expecting me to say that the Pokemon is going to be expensive, and you will be spending most of your money there. Well, not really. In fact, you're not going to have to spend much money on this at all. Acquiring the Pokemon could possibly be as cheap as the price of a Pokeball if you go out and catch one yourself. But even if you decide to get one from a breeder or a personal seller, your costs won't be much higher than low. Like I said earlier, there are hundreds of breeders out there that are selling these Pokemon. And because the supply is so high, that means that the price has dropped to a nearly record low. Even if you don't want a Caterpie and want one of the later evolutions, it won't increase the price very much at all. In the same vein, food won't cost you very much either. Caterpie will be free, just walk outside and pick a handful of leaves. Unless you're taking them from someone else's land, then you shouldn't have any trouble. And if you are doing that, stop that. That's rude. Butterfree, it depends on how much you want to spend on flowers, but at the minimum, you should be spending at about the upper range of the low category, possibly into the moderate category. Surprisingly, flowers aren't cheap for some reason, and you will need enough so that your Butterfree doesn't keep going to the same ones day after day. The flowers will need a bit of time to replenish their pollen after your Butterfree visits them. But then again, if you can find some wildflowers out in the woods and transplant them into your yard, this could end up being free as well. It's all about how willing you are to put in the work to find them. Really, the spot where you're going to spend the most money is the enclosure. And by most, I mean not more than a moderate amount. You'll need wood, glass, screws for Caterpie's enclosure, along with decorations like sticks and rocks, but again, you can just find them outside. And then just wood and screws for Butterfree to make its tree box. The raw materials will probably put you somewhere in the middle of the moderate price category. Of course, you could always buy a prefabricated one online and have it shipped to you, skipping the need to go out and figure out how to build them yourself. Less work, but they are more expensive, putting you more in the higher range of the moderate price category. They aren't better, at least not usually. But they do save a lot of hassle of getting the raw materials and making them yourself. Just searching for them online will bring up plenty of results. Conclusion. Personally, I think Caterpie and its evolutions are great first Pokemon, especially for kids. They're easy to care for, you can keep them in the house, at least before Butterfree, and look awesome in their enclosure. They aren't dangerous, and you can honestly take them out of their enclosure and interact with them really well. It builds a strong bond between the owner and the Pokemon and can get younger children used to interacting with Pokemon like that. It's one of the reasons that the Caterpie line is so popular worldwide. It's also great for people who don't have time to invest in a Pokemon that needs constant training and attention. Getting one of these won't be a full-time job just to care for the Pokemon. Give it some food and a bit of attention, and then go on with your day. So, I think Caterpie and its evolutions are great Pokemon to have, and could absolutely be the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Thank you for tuning in, and please tune in next time where we will be going over what many people consider to be the counterpoint to the Caterpie line, the Weedle line, which, oh boy, there's a lot in that one. See you next time.